Hey everyone, welcome back to Poker Fluency. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. We're going to start with an introduction to a tool called Rocket Solver, one of the tools I use in my own study. I'll show you what it does, how it works, and why it's especially useful when you're looking at complex multi-way situations, such as the ones that happen a lot in low-stakes cash games. From there, we're going to dive into a bit of a practical guide on studying these multi-way pots against weaker opponents. These come up all the time in live tournaments, live cash, all sorts of environments, and learning how to simplify and exploit effectively can make a big difference in your results. As you're watching, think about how these ideas apply to the games that you're playing in, and feel free to drop any questions in the comments so I can follow up. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the session. Let's dive in. So yeah, what I wanted to do was start out by just kind of giving you a bit of an intro to Rocket Solver, and we've been talking a lot about using it for running multi-way sims, and also just talking through a few of the sims that I ran to kind of accomplish a couple things. First of all, to sort of show you what some of these sims look like and get you comfortable with interpreting them, but also just to get a sense of how your current approach is varying from what it potentially could look like. Because it struck me talking to you the other day that with the amount of studying that you've done and how much you know about the game and how to use solvers and things like that, I was really surprised to hear that you're not winning at a higher rate than you are. So I want to try to figure out, why your win rate isn't higher and where some of these, where some potential errors might be coming in and things like that. And this is going to hopefully help us to accomplish that as well, just because if it does turn out that you see the sim and you're like, oh wow, I'm not playing anywhere near as aggressively as this or something like that, then that'll be a good sort of pointer that we can use to push us in a certain direction. So I'm going to load up a screen share, and you should see my screen coming through in just a second. So this is me sharing my home server. Basically, I have a server in my house that's just literally in my office right there that I run all my sims on. And I've got a bunch of Rocket Solver windows up, but to begin with, what I want to just start with is basically just walking through the process of setting up a sim and showing you, approximately how I would do it. So I'm going to get rid of all these windows down here because these are not going to be things that you'll see when you first log in or when you first load it up. So if you first load it up, you obviously won't have some of this stuff in here. This is from the last or the most recent sim that I ran. But basically, when you load it up, you're going to go to New. It's going to give you the opportunity to run preflop if you like, but I don't think you'll need to use that really. For raked cash games, it can, I think, do rake. I think it can. Actually, I'm not sure if it can. I think you can. There's an option somewhere else where you can program it for rake, but I don't really use it a lot for preflop. I just mostly use it for multi-way post-flop. And as you can see,
the preflop sims are huge.
yeah, the trees are really big. That's kind of
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're much bigger than that if you're running reasonable trees. The multi-way sim trees that you're going to get are also going to be pretty big, but it's a little bit easier to condense them to a size that's a bit more manageable. Obviously you've got number of players right here. You've got the positions of the players, stacks, and everything. You can just do big blind 1 and then do stacks in number of big blinds. I find that to be generally a pretty simple and easy way to do things, but obviously you can put the exact numbers in there if you want to. It has a built-in recognition of positions. So it uses U1, U2, U3 for the first 3 positions instead of U9, U8, U7, but it's not a huge deal either way which one you use. And then it recognizes the order of positions automatically. So if you just put in big blind to the bottom here, that's going to put the big blind in the correct position. So
can I pause you for a minute?
Of course.
So we're inputting the preflop ranges, so number of players doesn't really affect. We could say 3 players, we could say 4 players, as long as we input the correct ranges. It doesn't have to be 9 players. The sim won't.
No, the number of players that you're entering in here is the number of players that exist on the flop. So this is completely irrespective of how many players exist in the game. So yeah, this is just literally how many players are going to be active in the sim, basically. So let's say we just go with 3 for now, just to set up a simple sim. I'm going to hit create. Now there's a few options that you're going to need to tweak before you start setting up your game tree. The first thing is, this is where you enable rake. I've never really run raked sims in here. So you can set the condition for the different rakes, saw flop, or always, what the amount is. You can obviously take a specific percentage. So depending on the exact rake of your games, it might still be relevant to use that post flop, because that does kind of take some percentage of the pot away. It does have some impact. Then you've got the EVs here. Basically, all this does is this is controlling whether you are saving the EVs for each street. It's going to be doing the same thing one way or the other, whether you're actually calculating the EVs. It's just to actually save this data takes a lot of memory. And for the purposes of keeping the tree size fairly small, I don't think it's really necessary to do this. I do use it sometimes, particularly for the flop, when I'm just running a sim that is designed to, be able to kind of see where the EVs are at. So I do use this sometimes on the flop whenever I want to kind of know what the EVs are, but it is not really very necessary to use saving the EV data for streets after the one that you're running. So you won't really need to save turn or river EVs here. And I would just probably for now, I would just avoid it altogether, because it does blow up the trees quite a lot. Then you've got abstraction. And for this, basically this is going to just tell you how much simplification is going to exist on the later streets. If you were to go with perfect and perfect here, this represents just the entire game tree. If you were to go with perfect and 500, I think this is pretty reasonable, because this is showing you all turn cards and then a sample of 500 rivers for the specific set of turn cards. And then of course, if you want to simplify the turn here, you can go to 2000. So it's going to bucket together the different turn nodes, and it's going to create a simplified visibility on the number of turns here as well. And this would be, the most simplified here would be 500 and 500. This here would be a very rough approximation of the later streets, but it would give you still some idea of the flop. What I did for these sims that I ran is I went with perfect and 500. So it gives you pretty accurate flop strategies. There's a little bit of simplification for the river there, but there's not so much that it would really have a substantial impact here.
So the abstraction affects the resolution of the future streets.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
as you can see,
mostly concentrated on the flop. We can use, like you say, a good abstraction for the turn and then river less.
Yeah, exactly. What I would say here is that this is going to affect the size of the trees as well. And if you are focused on turn and river strategies, you're probably going to need to resolve certain spots anyway, because you want to get higher resolution on those later streets. So I would mostly say that with Rocket, you kind of have to take it street by street. It's not really that easy to solve the flop and have an inbuilt set of turn and river sims. So for this, I would just go, perfect 500 or even 2500 is totally fine. Then of course we have the ranges, and I've got a bunch of pre-saved ranges here that I used for the sims that I can just input whatever way I want. Don't have to make sure they're accurate.
Yeah, there we go. And then a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just putting in random ranges just to show you the process. It doesn't have to be accurate for this point. And then of course you just select the board. Again, we'll just select random board. And you can see the tree size at the bottom now this is with no bedding whatsoever, is 256 megabytes. So this is a very small tree. There's there's nothing in it. If I was to change the abstraction, it's going to go to a different size. Now, interestingly, it actually went up when I hit 500. For 2000, it goes to, it's not going to change. Perfect, 256. River, if I go to perfect, it goes from, it goes to 39 megabytes. So it's actually, with no bedding here, the abstraction actually increases the size of the tree, which is weird. But once I start to include any actual bedding in the tree, you'll see it changes things. Oh wait, no, it was 256 and it went down to 39. Never mind. So with no bedding, it Yeah, it was, yeah, it was, anyway, it doesn't matter. Um,
Right. What
the,
about settings?
settings, there's not going to be a ton of stuff that you need to really change in here. You can change the color scheme. You can change whether it displays the absolute EV or the EV relative to other
Right.
options.
I was more concerned with the thresholds and the number of limps and number of calls.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to need to use this limps and calls if you're not running preflop. This whole section at the bottom is also going to be irrelevant if you're not running preflop. So I just use, and in fact, the preflop bet to all in threshold is also going to be irrelevant. So I just use 40% here for converting bet to all in or call to all in. This is going to kind of keep the trees a bit more manageable, because if you allow like little small amounts of a stack left over after like a half pot, like a half of the stack goes in, it just creates a lot more nodes in the tree. So just 40% or so here is fine, but every other option
So the number
on here,
of limps, the number of limps and the number of calls are not relative because that's a pre-flop.
yeah,
stat.
exactly.
Everything. Yeah.
Right. All of that is pre-flop. Yeah. Everything that you see that's below, the only two options here that are relevant to post-flop sims are bet to all in threshold post-flop and call to all in threshold. This is, where it's going to convert either a bet or a call to an all in.
What about the number of threads that you use there?
This is just dependent on how much of your computer's processing power you want to use. I don't know enough about.
I have an 8-core machine. I can run 16 threads. I don't know if you're actually running 64 threads. That's quite high.
Well, I have a server, like I say, so that's, it has like 256 gigs of RAM, and it's built for running sims. So it's, like I said, I really don't know enough about computers to give you any advice here. I just know that this is.
I run 10 cores because I can actually run 16. I mean, I have 8 cores, so I can run 16 threads, but I only run 10 because I'd like to be able to see the emails or whatever. Otherwise,
of course, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the right number is.
I do have a lot of RAM. I have like 90 something. I can go up max to 128. Yeah, I have like 96 gig of RAM, so it's fairly high, but I am hitting the limit of it, so I might upgrade. Okay, great.
Cool. And so, color scheme and everything, it's all pretty straightforward. And now, now that we've got our board texture, our ranges and everything, now we need to actually build our game tree. And there's a lot of different kind of levels of complexity you can go to here, but I would probably say to start out with, just keep it fairly simple. What you have to do is you have to add post flop. And this is going to allow you to select a variety of sizes for post flop situations. And you're never going to need to use add pre-flop here if you're not going to run a pre-flop sim. So this is the only button you need to worry about down here, really, other than a couple of the other ones here. If I click add post flop, it adds one of these blocks down here, right? And generally, I think the simplest and easiest way to do this is to have 3 blocks, and one of them is going to be for the flop, one of them is going to be for the turn, and one of them is going to be for the river. You can get more specific with that if you like. Like, it does have the ability to allow you to sort of specify here whether it's heads up or 3-way. So you can set up like different sizes for if it goes heads up to the turn or 3-way to the turn. You can set up different scenarios for specifying donk bets. If you're going pre-flop, you can specify single raise pot, 3-bet pot, etc. And you can also specify which players these sizes are used by, whether it's in position, out of position, or specific players at the table. But I don't think you really need to do any of that. It's not really mandatory by any means. Once you start to get more comfortable with it, you might start playing around with that. But for now, I think all you really need to do is put 3 blocks, and then for one of them have only the flop highlighted, for another one have only the turn, and then another one have only the river. And all you really need to do here is the turn and river don't need to be super complex because you're running them with abstraction already. And let's say we want to go for the river first. We're going to go like 50%, we're going to go 100%, and we're going to go all in. So very, very simple bet sizes. Then we're going to go, the raises are going to be 50% and all in. And you can see it says 2-bet plus. So this is also going to be true for any re-raise, any 3-bet or 4-bet or whatever, right? So very, very simple river structure right there. For the turn, we're going to do a similar thing, except we're going to go 40%. We're going to go 2E, and we're going to go all in. And then we're going to go a raise size of 2E and all in. And then the flop, I'm just going to do a simple 25% size, and then a 2-bet of 50% and all in. And I'm also going to add a 3-bet size for the flop, which is to hit this button here, add bet level. And I'm going to make that 25% or all in. So this is, every bet after the first raise is going to be like a quarter pot re-raise, basically, right?
Right. So I was expecting your flop sizing to be have maybe multiple bet sizings.
Well, if you do
like-
that, it's going to increase the size of the tree, and I'm going to show you that in a second, right? So,
right, because I usually use when I use my solver, I usually use 25, 75, and 3E on the flop.
Right. So if we do that, I'll do that in a second. But let me just show you first of all how you actually set up the tree. If you hit apply bet sizes, it's going to apply the bet sizes to all players in the way that you've specified here, right? So it's going to give the big blind this size. You can see what the tree looks like over here. You can see all the different nodes of the tree and how they're all set up. And as of right now, the tree is 856 megabytes, which is pretty small. It's a pretty small tree because we've got pretty simple betting options here. If we add another flop size, so if I go bet 75 and then I hit apply bet sizes, it's going to go up to 1.101 megabytes. So this 1,101 megabytes. So this is already a 1 gigabyte tree right now. If I also add 3E, it's now going to become 1.3 gigabytes or so, because 3E is only 101% here. So this is not that big of a tree as it stands, but that's because we've gone with these very simple turn and river structures here. And if we were to add something like, let's say we add like a block size on the river here, maybe we add a 3rd size on the turn, maybe we add another turn raise size, another river raise size, things like this, apply bet sizes. Now we're at 1.8 gigabytes or so. So this is actually, because it's only 3 ways, this is not going to get that big here, which is kind of nice. If I allowed, let's say, a 2nd raise size, that would probably blow things up. Yeah, that doubled the size of the tree. So allowing both a small and a slightly larger flop raise, that basically doubled the tree to about 3.5 gigs here. And obviously, the size of the tree that you want to try to restrict it to is going to depend on what kind of availability of storage space you actually have.
Well, a question that.
Yeah.
So I was under the belief that if you're looking primarily at flop,
yep.
That these flop sizings would be okay. I probably don't need as many 2-bet and 3-bet. I probably just need 1 2-bet and 1 3-bet size, and then, but just limiting the turn and river to 1 sizing and 1 2-bet sizing would lower the resolution on those streets, but we would still get probably a clear picture with a smaller. I think we might get a smaller, just a smaller sim overall with the size.
I mean, I would be a bit hesitant to reduce to 1 size at any point on any street, just because that does simplify it to the point of almost not applying very practically. So I would be hesitant.
It would affect the flop.
Sorry.
It would affect the results of the flop sim.
Yeah, I mean, everything's going to affect the results of the flop sim to some degree. It's just a question of trade-offs, right? Like you're going to get a small impact from not having the greatest degree of complexity on the turn in the river. But if you were to, reduce turn and river to 1 size, you would start to see, slightly greater impacts. What you can do, and what you'll probably get accustomed to after you've run a few of these spots, is to have a different turn and river tree for when it goes heads up compared to when it goes 3-way. So what I do is and you'll see this in the sims that I've run, I tend to have a simpler tree for turn and river if it's still 3-way by that point. And then for the heads up spots on turn and river, I have a much more complex tree. And that tends to work pretty well. What you'll also see is that there's a big impact that's created from the abstraction. So if I go to the smallest abstraction, the tree size goes all the way back down to 831 megabytes. And if I go to the biggest abstraction, so perfect, perfect, it goes up to 250 gigabytes, right?
Right. So
So,
what would the effect of that be if you lower the abstraction on the turn-in river to the flop?
well, you just get lower resolution. You just get
On
weird
turn-in
looking
river,
turn.
though.
Yes, but you get it, but it has an echo effect back into the flop, right?
Okay.
So everything has an effect on everything because it's running all streets at once here, and like I say, there's a trade-off, right? If you're running perfect turn, then the effect on the flop is going to be minimal, and then there will be a small effect based on the river here. If you were to run perfect perfect, you'd be able to use this sim, and the turn and river outputs would be essentially it would be like PO in terms of accuracy level, because you'd be actually solving every single turn and river. If you go perfect in 500, it's solving every single turn with an abstracted set of rivers. So you're still getting an accurate strategy for every turn. It's just that you're still getting a strategy for every turn. It's just that strategy is not going to be perfect based on the river. And then if you abstract the turn, if you go to 2000 on the turn, let's say, you're still getting a fairly accurate flop strategy. But again, some of the lower frequency turn outcomes or lower frequency turn lines and things like that are going to be lower resolution. So it really just depends on, do you want to be able to view every part of the sim at high resolution, or do you mostly just want to get the broad strokes of the flop strategy? Because the more abstraction you do, the lower the resolution is going to be, the more imprecise the strategy is going to be.
Right.
So generally what I would do is, because the river, increasing the river to perfect just blows it up so much, I would just never really do that unless you're really looking to be able to use the turn and river runouts a lot. So I would just keep it to either perfect in 500 or 2000 and 500. I think that's going to be fine either way. But then you'll also notice that including the EVs blows it up quite a bit as well once you start to get to the later streets. So including turn and river EVs blows it up from 3.5 gigs to 13 gigs here.
Right.
And if I do the most extreme version, look at this. This is more than a terabyte, right?
Right.
From perfect with all the EVs.
Right.
And this is just with
Right.
a three-way sim. So it's probably completely unnecessary to go for the turn and river EVs here, but you can save the flop EVs without a big change. You can see it only added a small amount here.
Right.
So this is, kind of what we can go with, I think, for now. But basically, once you have the bet sizes sort of approximately set up, you can then edit the tree to a certain degree if you want. What I tend to do is remove all the donk sizes here. So you can right click on the big blind bet size, and you can either add a bet to the subsequent node here. So if I wanted to, let's say, add a bet size to middle positions range, I would right click on the big blind check node and then hit add bet. So maybe I want to add like a 50% size here. It's going to add that in there. But if I want everything after this 50% size to be following the same blueprint as the rest of the tree, I have to then right click it and go apply bet sizes. And now it gives me the same tree right here as it did for the other sizes. So
Okay.
I can do that. I can also just get rid of the donk sizes, which I will quite frequently do, because on this board, there's never going to be any big blind donking. So we've got now we've got 4 sizes on the flop here, but we've got rid of the big blind donk, which has now cut the tree down to 2,800 megabytes, so 2.8 gigs, which is kind of a, pretty manageable tree size, I think, for most computers. What is noteworthy, though, is that you will see different tree sizes for different types of flops, because when you are seeing a bit more, when you're using some abstraction, the nature of the flop is going to dictate whether or not certain turns can be bucketed together. So, for example, if this was Queen 5-3 monotone, so if I make it Queen 5-3 monotone here, the tree size has gone down to 1.1 gigs, because it's a lot easier for different turn and rivers to be bucketed together when the flop is monotone. Because if the turn is a 7, for example, it doesn't matter whether that 7 is diamonds, clubs, or spades, right? So all those turns are the same. If we look at a 2-turn flop, so like that, it's got 1.9 gigs. And that's because a turn diamond and a turn club are the same here. So it can bucket those together quite easily. If we look at the rainbow version, then now you start to get the biggest tree sizes, because there's only well, there's 4 different suits of turns that have completely different impacts. So it does start to, make an impact in that sense. The other thing that's going to make a difference here to some degree is whether the flop is paired or not. If it's queen, queen 5 here, you can see the tree size goes down just a little bit because there are certain turn cards that become a bit more identical to each other, like the queen of diamonds. Queen of diamonds and the queen of clubs are a bit different here, but basically paired boards are going to slightly decrease the tree size, and trips boards are going to be the smallest tree. You can see 1.1 gigs here, so trips boards would be decreasing it quite a bit. And then if we also change the ranges, we will start to see the tree increase or decrease. So if we went with, super wide ranges here, now we gave middle position any 2 cards and the tree immediately went up to 5.3 gigs, right? So the spots that are going to be easiest to run are going to be with narrow ranges, low SPRs, and like monotone or 2-tone boards. And then higher SPRs, wider ranges, rainbow boards, those are going to take longer and have bigger trees.
Question, Matt.
Yeah.
So the percentage that it uses certain, say a monotone board, if it's only using the small bet sizing and it's not using the other bet sizing at all or very little, would that affect the size of the sim as well?
It will, no, that will affect because the size of the tree is just a matter of how many options there are in it.
Okay.
What that will affect is the speed that it will converge. So
because if it's not using one of those sizes, then there's no tree after that.
Well, there is a tree. That's the thing, because it has the option to use that size.
I see.
This is the thing. There is a tree, but it will very quickly decide that option is bad, and so it just won't use that option, and that will help it converge quicker, right? So, for example, if there's a board texture where it's clearly bad for the big blind to donk bet, then it will very rapidly realize that, and allowing the big blind to donk bet won't have much of an impact on the speed of the calculation. But if there's a board texture, and I've tested this, like if you look at like a board texture where the big blind does have some incentive to donk bet, so like a triple low card, like 654 or something, I actually ran a 3-way sim I think it was a 3-way or 4-way, I can't remember, but it was a 4-3 deuce board, and both the small blind and the big blind had the option to donk, and it took like way longer than the other sims in a similar formation that I had run, because it's simply the fact that the big blind and the small blind both had a donking range on that board made it converge a lot slower. Right. So the tree size will be the same, because the tree size is a function of the options that are given to the solver, but the actual convergence time is going to be a function of how often each of those options is taken. Because if there's a wide variety of sizes being used at random different frequencies, it's going to take way more iterations to reach an equilibrium. Right. But if there's one clearly better size, it's going to reach an equilibrium much quicker. So that's kind of how it works.
So on that 4-3 deuce board, if you don't allow donks, you have a drastically different strategy versus if you had the ability to donk but never donk.
Yes. Well, no. Let me.
He didn't donk. He didn't choose to donk because.
Right. But this is the key, right? The strategy is going to look different, not based on the options that it's going to look different if you remove a certain option. Sure. But if you node lock a certain strategy, that's effectively the same as removing that option. So if I node lock the big blind to never donk bet, that's exactly the same as removing the option to donk bet altogether. But the strategy versus the check after the big blind checks, when the big blind has the option to either donk bet or check, then yeah, it's definitely going to be different, because we're playing, if they're forced to check their entire range versus if they're only checking like half their range, we're playing against a different range there. So the strategy is definitely going to change based on that. Yeah.
Right. So if you're doing a whole bunch of boards, just say over time, and you basically, most of the time you don't allow donks for economy of size, but then you come up to the 4-3 deuce board and you're sort of getting an inaccurate look on, and you don't allow donks, you're getting an inaccurate view on the flop of after he checks.
Yeah. Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Or at least you're getting a strategy that would be only applicable if you are very confident that your opponent has no donks on that board.
Okay.
So, you do have to take that into account. Yeah. And this is partly why, running sort of bigger batches of sims are always a bit tricky. It's that in heads up, it's not that big of a deal to add, donk sizes and things like that into the tree. And it doesn't change that much. But in multi-way, if you remove donks altogether, like there's some boards where there's going to be no donking at all, so it doesn't really matter. But there's also going to be some boards where donking is quite important, and the same is true for later streets multi-way too. So yeah, it's hard to run big samples of these boards for sure. But basically, this is all the options that we need here. Like we pretty much have everything we need to just hit the start button if we wanted to. But I'm not going to do that for this sim because I already ran a bunch of sims and I want to just show you those ones instead.
Sure.
So what I did was I ran a set of spots. I ran this King 8-3 board in a whole bunch of different spots. And the first one is with I ran it with 2000 turn abstraction and 500 rivers, saving flop EVs. My tree is pretty complex on the latest streets, as you can see. We've got like a ton of different river sizes for different spots, and we've got different turn sizes and various things like that. So it's a more complex tree. And then the flop is still fairly simple because I just want to focus energy on the flop. The ranges that I've used originally, what I've got is I've got 3 different versions of this sim. One where I used optimal ranges for like a deep stack big blind anti game, and then another one where I used slightly wider ranges, or slightly sort of simplified ranges, and then another one where I used even wider ranges than that. And there's some very clear trends across all 3. So we can just take a look at this immediately. The starting point here for this board, oops, I need to hover back over here so it can actually show me everything. Okay, cool. So starting point is big blind is never going to donk. I didn't allow them to donk this board because they're not going to do that anyway. Against the optimal ranges, we have a betting frequency with this quarter pot size of about 1/3 of the time here, right? And you can see that it's quite a diverse range. If I unweight the hands here, there's no category of hands that's just pure check here. There's no category of hands that's just like, we just can't ever bet this hand, right? And there are a few specific combos that are pure check, but it's a pretty diverse range. And, this is kind of in keeping with the fact that we still have to make sure that we are going to have a variety of options on later streets. So just taking a glance at this here in this kind of 4-way situation, how do you think this corresponds to the type of approach that you would generally be taking here? Like, how does this strike you just looking at it?
Oh,
here?
great. Thanks for asking, because I was just going to interrupt you. Yeah. So if we were just looking at big blind versus EP, we would be betting near range here.
Yeah. I mean, we could just range
static,
that, but I guess what I'm talking about is
small.
Right. And what I'm talking about is specifically if you were to get into this 4-way spot, how much betting do you think you would be doing?
Definitely. I keep comparing it to heads up, and that's kind of the problem. Like heads up, I'm betting a lot, and then out of position versus 3 players, 2 that are in position on me, I'm betting a low frequency. I do think I may be betting larger here if I do bet, but I'm definitely betting a lower frequency.
Talk me through the logic behind betting larger.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Well, we probably have more nuts advantage on this board. We have the king sets, and we probably don't have the 3 sets. We have the kings and 8 sets, so we won't have that huge nut advantage. We do have a slight nut advantage with the king sets, and then we do have the overpair aces. But I just going from multi-way, heads up to multi-way, I just am cautious on I'm not going to bet near range. I'm going to bet a small amount. And I think we do have range advantage and some nut advantage on this board. So probably, maybe not, maybe I'm rethinking, maybe not betting large, maybe betting small, with at a low frequency would probably be best.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where we're kind of ending up here, right? And I think the reason why I wanted to flesh out that there's not a ton of incentive to bet big here is simply because all these other three players, they have way too many easy decisions against a bigger bet, right? If we bet big here, they have tons of easy folds. And just to kind of illustrate that, I'll show you what they're supposed to continue with if we bet small. If we bet small, they basically continue, all their second pair plus, or this middle position player continues all their second pair plus. And there's actually, a lot of even a tiny bit of pocket sevens and sixes they have to call with. Even deuces calls at some tiny rate, which is kind of surprising. And then some ace highs with a backdoor as well that they're also supposed to call. If we bet bigger, all those hands would have trivial folds, but all their top pair plus and second pair type stuff would just always call. The in
So
position player,
their indifference point is like third pair.
yeah, basically against this small size, yeah. But it is slightly different for each player, because you can see middle position here. They're not really floating a lot of these like queen jack with a backdoor type hands. Cutoff is floating some of those, like they're calling all their jack 10 with a backdoor, that sort of stuff here. So obviously cutoff is defending a bit wider. And then big blind here, similar sort of a thing. Big blind has a lot more king X. They also have a lot more 3X, 8X type stuff. So they're defending some of those hands as well. And this isn't, solved to like perfect accuracy. It's just a generalized idea here that the bottom line, or the basic idea, is that against these optimal ranges, we can bet sometimes. There's certainly, a region of hands that has a decent incentive to bet, but we can't bet that often. But the comparison that I want to make is if we were to widen up those ranges. So this is the second version of this sim. So instead of those optimal ranges, first of all, I've kind of simpled out our range a little bit. I've just given us a fairly straightforward, tighter range. Then I've given middle position just this, relatively straightforward range again, basically taking out jacks plus and ace king. Cutoff, I've given them, slightly wider, but again, I'm just not including any kind of mixed frequencies of stuff here just for simplicity. And big blind, I've given them a really wide range here, so a much wider range than would be optimal. Now, before I flip over to actually show you the output, how do you think our betting frequency is going to be influenced by making these ranges wider?
Okay, so you calibrated for more of a live environment, with suboptimal calling ranges.
Yes.
Low 3-bet ranges after we open. And so I think we would be, let me just, how will it respect? I think that we will be, I think our betting frequency our size won't increase, but our betting frequency will increase slightly. I would think it might flip towards like 66 from 33.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we haven't changed the size because I didn't want to change the tree itself. I just ran it with different ranges. So yeah, our betting frequency has increased. It's gone up to 51%, right? Okay. So this is not, we're not looking at egregiously wide ranges here, but these are much more realistic ranges. And
the reason being, with my thought was that it would put them in more difficult spots with their wide ranges. They would have to be folding, and if they're not folding, they're overcalling. So we could no luck.
Yeah, right. We're basically, they're just in a situation where they have
later on as well.
Right. They just have way more weak hands in their ranges, right? They just have a wider range of hands that is going to be forced to be in some difficult spots here. They're still going to have just a lot of hands that have to fold. In particular, the big blind has tons of hands that just have to fold here. So the amount of indifference that we can create through a bet is going to go up. And even though there is, a slight kind of card removal impact where as soon as we have the bottom of our range, we're kind of blocking the bottom of all of these ranges, there's still enough equity to go around that, we're going to be able to bet quite a lot here.
Can we look at MP again after the bet?
Middle position? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
just up bet.
Yeah. So yeah, they're supposed to be folding more with third pair here. Because they have a wider range. If you go back to the other, you don't have to go back to the other one, but the third pair was a little bit, they were folding less third pair.
They're actually folding more in the original one. So in the original one, the third pair category is folding 90% of the time. In the new one, the third pair category is folding. Oh, so they're folding. Yeah, so they're folding less. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. They're folding third pair less often. They're folding 75% of the time. The reason for that is that they have to avoid overfolding egregiously here, right? So in order to, like, they have a choice of continuing with third pair or folding at an even higher frequency than they already are with this against this bet. And if they did fold all those third pairs, it would just increase the EV of our bet even further. So in the end, widening up their ranges allows us to do more betting, basically. That's the starting point here. The second starting point, or the continuation of this dynamic is that if I have this third version of the sim, I kept our range the same. I gave them wider ranges still. So this is the first calling range, the second calling range right here, super wide, like basically a big blind range. And then the big blind range here, I've just given them any suited hand and just a bunch of trashy offsuit stuff. So these ranges are clearly going to create an even more aggressive strategy for us. And it has gone up to 53% here. Now, it hasn't gone up that much, which is interesting. But part of the reason for that is that if you think about the hands that I've specifically have added to the ranges, it's actually going to be consisting of a lot of King X. So the middle position player has a lot of weaker suited kings that they didn't previously have. The cutoff now has all the suited kings that they didn't previously have. And the big blind has a bunch of offsuit kings that they didn't previously have. So that slight increase in the amount of King X that they have is sort of tempering our ability to be quite so aggressive here. But you can see that our frequency here 4 ways is jumping up above 50% quite comfortably. And I think this is just completely contrary to how most people perceive these multi-way situations, because they think, oh, I've got 3 opponents to get through. Like, how could I possibly bet half my range here? But in fact, there's only really a few hands that really can't bet here. Like Queen 9 is a bad candidate to bet here. It looks like Ace Queen, Ace Jack has no reason to bet. But everything else in the range is mixing at least some bets. So I think it's very relevant here to just recognize that this situation is not a bad one for us. Just because we're against
even though we have, they have a lot more King X, they also have, as a percentage of their range, they don't have, they're still not
exactly
well
right.
with the rest
Yeah,
of their hand.
right. So if we look at, let's say the first player here, in the original version, when they had an optimal range, they had 8.3% top pair. And now they have, in this very wide range, they have 16.9% top pair. So they have more top pair. But they also, if you look at the nothing region,
yeah, more nothing.
right? They had
24%.
24%. Exactly. So they've got way more nothing now. So they're just increasing the number of trash hands in their range as well. And this is kind of the thing, that when our opponent's ranges get wider, it's not possible for their range to get wider, but also get stronger at the same time. So one way or another, the wider the ranges that we're up against, the more aggression we're going to be able to show against those ranges across all boards. And the major factor really is just going to be a question of understanding how our frequencies on each individual board alter depending on the exact types of hands that are added in here. So for example, recognizing that because the big blind has a lot of offsuit King X now, this is not quite as good of a board for us to show aggression on, but it's still completely fine. And we're not range betting, but we're not range checking either. We're not even close to it. So, this is what people mostly don't recognize about multi-way. It's that if your opponents have these ranges full of trashy hands and they have super wide ranges, well, a wide range is a weak range. And a weak range is a range that we get to play aggressively against. So even the collective unit of 3 ranges here doesn't do a lot to hurt us. Now, if I go back to the first sim and, we're going to get rid of this first sim, we're going to keep the sim with the really wide ranges, but instead I'm going to actually look at a version of this that's 5 ways. And then I'm going to look at a version that's 6 ways. So in these cases, what I've done is the 5-way spot, I've added in the small blind and I've given them the same range as the cutoff just for simplicity. In this case, we've kept these super wide ranges for everybody. But if we look at our strategy here, our C-bet frequency 5 ways does go down to 38%, but that's not a massive drop. We dropped from 53% to 38%, and we still can do a pretty decent chunk of betting here, even 5 ways, right? We're still able to bet hands that a lot of people would never bet here 5 ways. We're still able to bet with an 8. We're still able to bet with queens through 9s sometimes. We're still able to bet with low pocket pairs sometimes, and so on. And then even if we go 6 ways with another player here added on the button, who again also has the same range as the cutoff in this case, we now are still able to bet about a quarter of the time, 6 ways. And our range is becoming more restricted. So we're sticking to very specific types of hands a bit more now. But even being 6 ways to the flop doesn't prevent us from having a c-bet range here. It doesn't prevent us from having a strategy that shows some degree of aggression. And this is about the widest set of ranges that you could possibly see here in a situation like this. This is a relatively favorable flop for us overall. So, it does mean that even in some favorable situations, it's not like our c-bet frequency is going to be super high 6 ways. But it is a spot where, even though each individual opponent has, let's say, you can see 17% top pair, 15%, 15% again, 15% again, 11%. Like collectively, one of them has top pair at a pretty high rate here. That still doesn't mean that we are prevented from showing any kind of aggression, right? It still just means that we can go ahead and bet some. And I didn't change the size here, but it would be completely reasonable to just decrease the size from, in this case, we're betting 3.75 big blinds for quarter pot. But if we just decrease to like 2 big blinds, we probably would be back in that 40 to 50% bet frequency kind of a region here. So, that is just a natural sort of a byproduct of the presence of more ranges that we have to bet even smaller. But it's just worth noting here that, there's this idea out there that, for multi-way, you just have to be, really value heavy and stuff like that. And it's just not true at all.
So question.
Yeah.
So going from heads up to 3-way, 4-way, we're definitely going to see a decrease in frequency.
Yeah.
But going to 5-way and 6-way, it's really not that much of a difference. I mean, not a difference, but it's really not going to decrease our
the way I would put it
that much.
The way I would put it is that the more ranges you add to the pot, the more likely it is that those ranges that you're adding are going to be very, very wide. And the wider the range that you're adding, the less of an impact it has on our strategy. So if for example, we were to go 6 ways to the flop, but somehow 2 or 3 of those 6 players had quite tight ranges, then we would actually have to play a bit more cautiously 6 ways. But if we go 6 ways to the flop and we have a tight range and everybody else has just ranges full of garbage, then the collective strength of those opposing ranges is not that high, right? So the amount of players that are in the pot matters less than the collective strength of those ranges, is what I would say. And generally, when you're 3 ways, 4 ways, you're going to, at least the first caller is going to have a slightly stronger range. The second caller is going to have kind of an okay range. And then the fourth caller and beyond, they're all going to probably have very weak and passive and trashy kind of ranges. So that's why adding more players doesn't generally have that much of an impact. It's because you're usually adding a lot of trash hands when you add more players. But hypothetically, it is possible to create a scenario where you go 4, 5, 6 ways and somehow, you're up against a bunch of tight players and they just all have pocket pairs or something. But it just isn't very likely. And so that when you do see these 5, 6 way pots developing, it's just overwhelmingly likely that somebody in that hand, or probably at least 2 players in that hand, have hands that are not supposed to be involved in that hand. Because in order to go 6 ways to a flop, somebody somewhere has to make a call pre-flop that they're not supposed to make. Does that make sense?
Right. And so looking at a static flop where we have advantage. If we look at and we don't have to look at it now, of course, but if we, for example, we're considering, we've already talked about like a disadvantaged flop, like 4-3-2 or whatever, that will probably be checking range. But when we get into those neutral boards like Queen 10-8, would we expect to see heads up versus multi-way?
Well, it would be the same dynamic. It
Interesting.
would just be a board that if we were heads up, we would be betting sometimes, but not that often. Multi-way, if we add more players, the frequency is going to go down.
Depends on, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's unlikely that too many boards are going to become range checks that wouldn't be range checks heads up, but there might be some. I mean, particularly the ones that are very concentrated around middle cards with possible flop straights, something like a 9-8-5 or something. Like if we start
Right.
to get to a point where there are a lot more of the two pair hands that should be folding pre-flop but aren't. Like if the flop comes 9-8-5 and suddenly it's possible for players to have 9-8 offsuit or 8-5 suited that, they should never usually have those
Sure.
hands, but maybe they can now.
Well, that's why they're playing those hands.
Right. But
For that
what I
spot.
mean, right. But what I mean is that if the ranges that are in the pot are pretty strong on that board, then, we're going to have reason to range check it. But on a board like the Queen 10-8, that's a texture where, yeah, I mean, maybe the wide ranges would add some two pair combos and some Jack 9 off or something to their ranges,
Right.
but they're also going to they're just going to have a bunch of undercards that just can't do
Right.
anything. So,
And we would probably be increasing our bet size on that type of flop as well.
Relative to a different type of flop, maybe, but not relative to heads up. We're not going to start going bigger multi-way compared to heads up. We're just going to go with a size that
Right.
makes sense. In fact, in
Right.
most cases, we're going to go smaller. Ultimately, I think that Queen 10-8 board is one that, now that we have a lot more ability to run post-flop sims, there's just a lot of situations where that board actually should be a range bet heads up anyway. And I think that just a lot of the logic that we used to teach about that board, coming from back in the day when running sims was a lot harder, that board is a pretty good board for the pre-flop raiser in most cases.
Sure.
So I think that, it is a board that we're going to have some bets on. I think I might be a bit less inclined to use like a 25% size on that board, but I would probably like bet 40% or something just
Right.
to target like the bottom pair 8x hands that are in an annoying spot, target some of the gut shots, things like that. But yeah, there's a couple of different viable strategies there. But
So
I
did you
would
get through most of the presentation that you wanted to do today?
not quite all of it yet, but there was
Okay.
just one additional thing that I wanted to show basically.
Okay, good.
But
So
just
just-
send me 5 minutes for a couple questions.
Yeah, of course, no worries. So the only other thing I wanted to show here really was if we keep this original, oops, that's the 5-way spot. If we go back to this original one against the wide ranges, and we actually change the SPR, so instead of having 100 in the pot, 15 in the pot and 100 in the stacks, if I go 15 in the pot and we have only 50 in the stacks, or 15 in the pot and 200 in the stacks, we're going to see slightly different outputs. So when we're looking at a shallower situation, now we're able to bet more often. We're actually shallower, we're betting about the same amount. This is 48.8, so about 50% still. So actually slightly less often. I thought it was going to be more often, but basically making it shallower here isn't really changing the stack off thresholds too much. It's not really altering the sim dramatically. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right one here. 48.8%. Let's go shallow version. I think that was the right one I opened up. Okay, yeah, it was. Okay, 48.8%. So yeah, a little bit less betting when we're a bit shallower. A little bit surprising to see that, but basically bottom line here is if we go deeper, 45%. So a little bit less betting as well when we're slightly deeper. So there are going to be a couple of factors influencing this, but essentially what I'm kind of getting at here is that the changing the SPR on a board like this is not massively altering things, because ultimately the ranges that we're up against are still the same now, right?
Right.
If
we don't really need to increase our frequency here because stacks are low and we have 2 more streets to go. So we're definitely
well,
going to
I mean, that would be in the spot
yeah,
where it's
yeah,
shallower. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But it's also, we're targeting the same range of hands. That's kind of the
Right.
thing. Like the range of hands that folds here in this short stack version from middle position, it's like the third pair, a lot of that sort of stuff. At deeper stacks, it's pretty much going to be the same kind of region, like third pair. So we're targeting the same regions of hands. So there are some small nuances that change here, but not a ton, basically.
Could you go back to EP strategy on 200?
Yeah, right there.
Okay, so yeah, so we're about,
Oh, there's not much difference.
from that and the 50.
Yeah. So basically what I'm getting at here is that the ranges that we're actually up against are by far the most important thing here, right? It's not even the number of players necessarily, because adding more players and giving them trashy ranges doesn't change a lot. It just makes it a little bit harder for us to successfully bluff because there's just more players to get through. But the bottom line is the ranges that we're up against, if they're full of trashy hands, we can still play aggressively against those ranges. And there's not a huge amount of requirement on us to drastically slow down or just only be value heavy or anything like that. Because ultimately, a lot of the spots that people are missing are spots where you do bet the flop without value, and then you have plenty of turn barrel opportunities and so on,
Great, excellent.
Cool. So yeah, what were the questions that you wanted to cover?
So basically looking at the
zoomed out view of what I'm going to do, I'm really impressed. I think this is really great. What I've been doing with GTO Plus and I've been doing with Wizard, but now that I'm not with Wizard, I'm back to GTO Plus again. I've been doing 49 and larger subsets, looking at flop textures and looking at breaking them down into different components, characteristics of the flop, like whether they're ace high, king high, queen high, whether they're monotone, etc., etc. And
so I've been comparing them, trying to build
full heuristics out of that. And I did spend a lot of time with your series on using multiple bet sizing and then finding the indifference points, and then using individual bet sizes to see which is most effective, targeting the point of indifference. And so I've done a lot with that and pulling heuristics out of heads up stuff, and realizing that I'm not really going heads up that often. That multi-way is sort of a better approach. So I was thinking of whether I wanted to kind of duplicate that project on a macro level, looking at flop subsets. I know that Rocket is going to have functions to be able to run scripts to run multiple flops very soon. Zoom in and look at particular flops and understand the micro of it.
So I'm going to recommend a third thing altogether, which is I think you should spend significantly less time looking at the flop and significantly more time looking at turns and rivers, because it's very apparent just from all the projects that you've done when it comes to the aggregate reports and things like that, that at this point you've spent enough time on flops that nothing that you do from this point on is going to provide you with some kind of overarching insight that's going to drastically change how you're playing. And I think that as long as you're in approximately the right territory with most of your flop strategies, which I'm pretty sure you probably already are, I think that almost all the EV that you gain in terms of an edge is going to come from turns and rivers. And
most of what I've experienced in single race pots has been B25. I understand what the overbet boards are. I understand what some of the B75 boards are. I kind of get that.
Yeah.
But I was wondering whether or not if we switch to multi-way, if that breaks down. If there's now...
It won't break down enough that it's going to provide like a massive edge for you to understand how it breaks down, right? Like, but basically what I'm getting at is that if you look at multi-way and then you use that as a framework for studying how the turn and the river is different after the flop is multi-way. So you bet the flop multi-way and you get called versus you bet the flop heads up and you get called. That's going to have some merit, but I think that I can certainly see the merit behind running some multi-way sims to understand the generalities of the different kind of flop types and things like that. But just from hearing the way that you're looking at things today and the way that you're picking up the strategies, relatively clearly and relatively obviously, I would say in your independent study time outside of the sessions that we're doing together, I would heavily recommend putting more time and energy into the later streets, because as of right now, your knowledge of the flop is really good, but you're not winning that much. And the only possible reason for that is either you're making a bunch of pre-flop mistakes, which is probably pretty unlikely, or you're spending so much energy on the flop that you're not putting a ton of time into turns and rivers. And I think that's probably the likely scenario. So
right. Well, my problem with, just to get off the track, my problem
Sure.
with where I'm at now is, of course, the game is much bigger than I've ever played. I mean, 300 big blinds is standard.
Sure.
And the ranges can get really wide. People like to gamble. There'll be one or two players
Sure.
that'll just occupy the whole game gambling with like throwing shit back and forth. But where I'm kind of missing out is probably not playing enough hands with these players, gaining EV against these wide ranges, understanding these wide ranges and how I can interact with them. And, and I'm perhaps too predictable. When I come into a hand, they're playing wide ranges again to hit their straights or whatever, or sets, or if they're, so I'm sort of, easy to read, so they want to crack my aces or whatever. So, I have to start playing more hands, and I have to be more comfortable playing these multi-way pots with wide ranges. And that's why I'm not winning.
Okay.
So
I'll stop you there for a second, because playing more hands is not the remedy here if you're not playing the hands that you're currently playing in the right way. So playing more hands is not going to do anything except get you into a greater number of spots where maybe you might actually already be making suboptimal decisions. So
right.
what I would say is that, like I said, you know enough about pre-flop and you know enough about the flop. It's very unlikely that either of those streets are causing any kind of weakness here. If it's true that you are, people are seeing you as somewhat predictable and things like that, it could easily be the case.
I'm probably not opening wide enough.
Okay.
Especially in later position.
Sure.
A lot of those hands I just don't play.
Yeah.
I came right last time I played, I opened the button for 5-4 suit.
Okay. Well, that is
that's a problem.
So that is a problem. But what I really want to hone in on here is the bulk of your win rate comes from your ability to play turns and rivers better than your opponents.
I get it.
And as of right now, like I say, you know the flop. You know the flop clearly well enough, like much better than any opponent in your game. I can guarantee you your understanding of flop strategies is light years ahead of every single player you're playing against. I mean, I truly, like, there's guaranteed to not be a single player in your games that understands the concept of like nut advantage and selecting bet sizes and things like that. Okay. But everything that we know about the flop counts for very, very little if we make turn and river mistakes. So I think that there's good mileage in doing some multi-way stuff in our sessions, but I would actually say that probably the most likely thing that we should go into is looking at what happens in some of these multi-way spots where we bet the flop, we get called, and now we have to navigate the turn. And I want to figure out where your strategy is at in comparison to where it should be, because if it's true that your opponents are perceiving you as somewhat predictable and so on, it's going to be because of turn and river errors. So I think that's heavily the direction that I want to shift in. And multi-way flops, that's going to be part of it, but particularly focusing on multi-way flops going into heads up turn and river situations, or even multi-way turn and river situations. Because it's just very apparent to me from this that there's no glaring weakness in your understanding of the flop that needs to be fixed. So the only reason why you're not absolutely smashing these games instead of winning at, $10 an hour or whatever it was you said, it has to be related to turn and river stuff. It just has to be. So that's the direction I think is going to be the highest benefit.
But we have to look at, you have to run flop sims to get there, though.
You don't always. If you understand what the ranges look like that you think are arriving at that spot, you can just run a turn sim and structure it in whatever way you want. Now, sometimes it's a little easier to run the flop sim first because you get a well-rounded turn range that you can just copy across. But even in PO Solver, you can actually just manually select the range that you're up against and run a turn sim heads up.
But we're going multi-way to the flop, so we have specific ranges for each opponent. And then once we reach, based on our action there, once we reach the turn, and it could be on a multitude of different turn cards, not a multitude, but I mean many different turn cards. So there's different. It's kind of difficult for me to comprehend that.
Well, what I mean is that let's say I wanted to set up a turn sim here in Rocket, right? If I wanted to say, okay, we're going to go heads up to the turn here. Doesn't matter what the action is. You know, if I know the turn SPR, I know what the turn card is. Just put a random turn card up there. And now all I would need to do is put the ranges in that I think each player would actually have. So I would put in a range that might reflect my flop strategy. So for example,
Right, but aren't
say,
you
okay,
running that off of what the flop sim was?
not, you don't have to, is what I mean. Like if I know what my approximate flop strategy is going to look like, I can manually input it here
Sure.
without having to run the flop sim. And I can do the same for my opponent. So I think, you know, my opponent is calling the flop with like, okay, maybe I think they're calling with like their top pairs. Like they're going to call with, you know, they have this kind of top pair region. They have, you know, a bunch of middle pair, something like this. They have pocket pairs here, like something like that. You know, maybe, let's say maybe they have the back doors that have these cards. So like, you can see it's got 9-8 of diamonds is in there now, right? All 8-7 suited is in there. Oh, wait a minute. 9-8 diamonds is. Oh, yeah. Oops. I wanted to go all right there. So now, yeah. So if I just select, so it's just selecting one suit. Okay, never mind. I didn't realize it was doing that. But let's say I want to select the hearts, and I want to say, okay, I'm going to think they're going to call with ace 9 through ace queen of hearts. You know, this stuff of hearts. Then we just go back to all. You can see it's got 25% selected. So it's got just the hearts selected in their range.
Right.
And I can run.
Would it be easier just to run it off of the flop sim though? The hands that they got?
I mean, it depends, because if you think your opponent is responding suboptimally on the flop, then instead of node locking a flop sim that gives you both players' ranges and then taking the time for the flop sim to run, you can just plug in what you think your flop strategy would actually look like and what you think your opponent's flop strategy actually looks like.
Talking about going heads up.
So why are we even working with Rocket? Why don't we just work with this?
Well, this is, I mean, I'm just showing you that this works the same way in Rocket as it does in PO.
Sure.
Like I could have just as easily opened PO on my desktop here, but it would have taken longer. So it, the bottom line is that if you know the two sets of ranges that arrive at the turn, you can manually select those ranges in a solver and solve that spot. The less, or the more confidence you have that your opponent is playing suboptimally on the flop, the more power you have to actually manually select the range that they go to the turn with and select your flop strategy, because you already know roughly what your flop strategy looks like. And you can just solve that spot for the turn without needing to actually solve the flop. So studying the turn and river in a scenario where the flop is multi-way is possible even without Rocket. It's just you have to do a lot more manual work.
And then you're looking at different turn cards. You're looking at different turn cards.
I mean, you can just, I mean, in PO, what you can actually do is you can solve the flop with no betting on the flop, and then it'll give you every turn card. So you just solve the flop with two ranges and don't allow any flop betting, and you'll see all the turn cards. But in GTO Plus, you might be able to do that. I don't really know. But
I don't want to keep you over too far, but what I like to do is build, I like this idea. I would like to build a study method based on this idea. And I really don't, you know, I have to flesh it out a little bit to see how I would actually do it.
Sure.
But we can work on that in future sessions.
What we'll do next time is I'll look at some turn spots, and we'll build a methodology for doing this, because I think this is, you know, it's certainly an important thing. And I'll show you a couple of different versions of turn sims where, you know, we can do it manually, or we can do it by running the flop sim first, and we might get, you know, relatively similar results. So
I'd also like to work out an idea for accurate reports based on the work that I'm doing. I love to save the work that I do so I can refer to it and compare, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
I mean, I think that if the aggregate reports function on Rocket when they release it, you know, that'll make life a lot easier, obviously.
Sure. I don't mind running. I don't mind building my own. I've been doing it for so long.
I mean, if you get comfortable with running a sim and you just keep it relatively, you know, simple in terms of the structure that you're using, you know, building your own aggregate report is pretty feasible.
And I get nervous because we're going over. I
don't worry about it.
When I talk to my attorney, I get the same feeling.
Don't sweat it. Not a big deal.
I know he's got the meter running.
No, not the same with me. It doesn't work that way. It probably should, but it doesn't. Anyway, let's stick with same time next week, and we'll go into some turn spots, and I'll show you all those things that I was referring to.
Okay, really, really
right.
good. Lots to think about, and 11:30 next week.
All right, sounds good. Talk to
Okay,
you then.
thank you so much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no worries.
it.
See ya. Bye-bye. So that's it for today's session, an introduction to Rocket Solver and a bit of a look at studying multi-way pots. We're going to go into this in further sessions, so stay tuned for some more. If you found this video useful, give it a like and leave a comment with your biggest takeaway or something you'd like to cover, or something you'd like me to cover in a future video. And don't forget, I've got some discounted coaching packages available right now. If you'd like to help me build your own study plan, or if you'd like me to help you build your own study plan or walk through spots like these one-on-one, just send me an email at pokerfluency@gmail.com. Finally, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future deep dives like this one, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.